outsiders telling us who we are. Sometime this past June, I attended a meeting with the Dean of Cal State LA who oversaw Chicano Studies and the Chair of Chicano Studies, a man named Michael Solatenko, who's not a Chicano, which means Mexican American, born in the U.S. There is no substitute. I was part of the Chicano Task Force, which is a subcommittee of the Chicano Round Table that meet weekly at the Boys and Girls Club in East Los Angeles, not too far from Ford and the 710 freeway exit. I attended with great guys who, even though we have different perspectives on all things, we agreed that changing the name from Chicano Studies to Latino Studies was an affront to Mexican Americans and wrong for the sake of the politically correct era that somehow people born in Latin America have to be accommodated while Mexican Americans born in the U.S. are thrown under the bus. I've not written about this because I needed to process the words and reasoning from both the dean and the chair. Dean Henderson sounded like he was given a script from the non-Mexican American faculty in Chicano Studies that justifies why Guatemalans, Salvadorians, Southern Mexicans have to be given recognition when they are not historically Americans, or by all accounts, Northern people, Northern Mexican Americans. Can Guatemalans and Salvadorians trace their history to California or Arizona or New Mexico? Where are their historical monuments in California? And I do take it personal because this, as someone from an Apache Cucapá lineage from the Southern California Yuma region, I view outsiders with mistrust, especially when they arrive and feel entitled. They sure don't show any consideration to those of us born here, and the same can be stated for Southern Mexicans who show up to the north and believe that they are owed something. The likes of Saúl Figueroa, Xiwan Montalvo, David Sanchez, Rubén López, Agustín Cevada, and Luis Garcia and Pope Aguilar were in attendance to protest the proposed name change. After back and forth, respectable but heated debate, the dialogue took us to the most important part of the meeting that began with Michael Soldatenko stated the following. The problem here is I think we have a different definition of what is a Mexican American. According to your definition, somebody like Rudy Acuña is not a Chicano, author of one of the books considered important in the canon of Chicano studies called Occupied America, when it should really just should have been called Occupied Mexico. For the record, Solatenko admitted he was born in Mexico City too, when questioned where he was during the Mexican American movement or the Chicano movement of the early 70s, and he stated, I was in Mexico, meaning he was not in the U.S. like us. That's true. Chicanos are U.S. born people, I replied. He was not happy in my reply, and yet the most poignant part was when Luis Garcia asked him, well, what's your definition of a Chicano? And he remained quiet. I couldn't help but think the following the subsequent months since that meeting. Since the time of my birth in 1969, a constant legal definition of a U.S. citizen has been birth with naturalization coming in at second. Though some might say they are the same, there are certain qualifications that only applies to U.S. born and not those naturalized. Second, in an era where laws are being changed and those that naturalize but engage in illegal activities, sometimes even political, find themselves being deported after their time, one can't help to comprehend that those Mexican Americans won't be on any bus for deportation, and vice versa. Mexican Americans in Mexico do not exist as in anything because they weren't born there. So to them we're foreigners and gringos to them too. Birth is sacred in both countries. At least those born in Mexico have a place to return to. We don't. Barrios, basically. And it shows history to both countries. When someone is born in Mexico, it means they had a presence there for at least one generation. The same can be said for those of us born here. We have presence. I was born here. My grandmother was born in Yuma, even though she gave birth to my father in Mexicali. Her father and mother were born in Arizona. My children are U.S. born too. Birth isn't just luck. It's a connection which people born outside don't have. My children are 7th generation by their Mexican American grandmother from the maternal side. Born in Los Angeles, grandmother was born in Clifton, Arizona. Great grandmother born in El Paso, somewhere near Isleta. Their mothers was born in Santana. How do others compare to my children's history? They don't. And I'm not the only one. Agustin Cevada was born in Cuba, New Mexico. Yeah, Cuba. Whereas Soldatenko, in his mention of the so-called father of Chicanos, was not. So how do they compare to somebody like Cevada or myself, where we are U.S. born? But that's the part that irks me the most. Who are foreigners to come and tell us, to the U.S., and tell us, U.S. citizens, Mexican Americans, who we are? This is the part I cannot reconcile, because it is these outsiders who are the heads of so-called Academia of Chicanos when they are not Mexican Americans. Non-Mexican Americans telling us who we are, and I find that to be disgusting because it's another form of colonialism, albeit coming from brown people, but worse because it's coming from non-U.S. citizens. Mexican Americans don't go to their universities and tell them who they are. That's what gives them the right to feel they can dictate to us. Where else is this permitted? The assumption is that because whites see us all as Mexicans, then we can be lumped with people from Mexico. But in actuality, for U.S. whites to lump U.S. citizens with another country is in itself racism. Just because we might share the same name, then Mexican Americans must be from Mexico? Can people not distinguish between the American part? Why? Because we're racialized. It is easier to write us off as foreigners versus considering us to be American. But I don't deal with anything that a Mexican national has to deal with when migrating to the U.S. I don't stand in line for a green card, take a citizenship test, or deal with relatives in southern Mexico. That is not my history. So yes, I find it insulting and disrespectful that universities permit foreigners from Mexico and now Central America to dictate to me, a Mexican American, what I am, which is not a foreigner. If I didn't allow whites, my fellow U.S. citizens, to dictate who I am, why should we permit a Mexican national to dictate? Who the hell are them? If they want to talk about Mexican nationals in the U.S., go ahead, but don't speak for Mexican Americans and don't steal from us what little we have. The same could be said for Central Americans. They don't know Mexican American culture. We don't speak the same, have a different cosmic vision, and look different. And the same can be said when employing other U.S. citizens such as Puerto Ricans and Chicano studies, much like Cal State Long Beach has done. They don't know Mexican American culture, and we don't know them either. And this I can tell you by the 2 Puerto Rican boyfriends my mother has had. We don't have cultural similarity. Though the issue is not isolated to Cal State LA, it's also at Cal State Long Beach, as I mentioned, along with the current chair who was undocumented by his own admission. Mexican Americans have never been illegal. That narrative does not apply to us. And even the UCLA faculty has people from Mexico, such as Raul Hinojosa, who was my instructor at UCLA Urban Planning. But he's not Mexican American because he was born in Mexico City, not in the U.S. That is university racism by lumping them into Chicano studies, which has always been about those from the U.S., not those that migrate north. But those faculty don't care because it's a job, a retirement to them, and they benefit while we U.S. born lose. And the best part, these foreigners born in Mexico hire others born in Mexico because they share their same narrative and screw over those born here. Some say they have qualifications, but why do they hire an EDD when it's not a PhD or an MA in fine arts or creative writing? They make up rules as they please and attempt to change to meet their cultural needs, which always ends up coming at the expense of U.S.-born Mexican Americans, because nobody believes they exist today because they assumed ought to be immigrants. Lastly, I cannot help but think that the majority of us complaining about the proposed name change were Mexican Americans looking in, while foreigners were the ones in positions that should have belonged to Mexican Americans. This was the Apache blog by Julian Segura Camacho. Thank you very much.